Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this regular called meeting of the Temple City Council, December the 18th. If you'll please rise. Pastor Pat Dietrich with First Lutheran Church will lead us in the invocation. Pastor.
Let us pray. Stir up your power, O Lord, and come. Come to us in our abundance and in our need, in our faith and in our fear, in our grief and in our joy. Come to us in every way. Come into our hearts so that we are ready to prepare the Lord Jesus, the Christ child, the Savior of the world. Come to us every day, for we trust in your power and love. Guide and inspire this city council to make wise decisions and grant this community your wholeness and your peace. Amen.
And our pledge will be led by Bell County Judge John Burroughs. Judge?
Join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor Dietrich, and thank you, Judge. Next item on our agenda is an opportunity for public comment. Citizens who desire to address the council on any matter may sign up to do so prior to the meeting. The public comments will be received during this portion, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. No action will be taken by the council based on this section. And I don't believe we have anyone signed up to speak this evening. So we'll move on to the next. We have presentations. The first presentation is to outgoing Parks Foundation members. And Mr. Sikora.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. In the year 2000, a group of citizens got together and formed the Temple Parks Foundation, and the main purpose be to raise funds to supplement the needs of the park system. And in that short period of time, I think they've been very successful and done quite a bit, including helping to get the Pool of Tears built, bought our stage that we use for special events, the Art in the Park program, and the movies in the park. Through the years, we've gone through, I think, we've had 4 presidents of the board, and we have a new one now, Alan Einboden. And I'd like Alan to come up. There's a couple board members who are leaving the board, and we thought it was very appropriate for all the work they've done for the community to recognize them tonight, and I'd like Alan to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I sure appreciate the opportunity. I want to just briefly tell you a little bit about the Parks Foundation. The mission of the Temple Parks Foundation is to increase awareness, quality, and community support of our parks by expanding the resources made available to our city parks. And as all of you, I'm sure, will agree that great cities have great parks, and I think that Temple is very fortunate to have a great park system, but we would like to make it greater so that it grows with the city and prospers. I do feel very fortunate to be able to recognize 2 members that have served very distinguished roles with the Parks Foundation over the past few years. And the first person I would like to recognize is Charlie Kimmey. As you know, Charlie is well known in the community with his service at Ralph Wilson and as executive director of Ralph Wilson, as well as service in so many ways in the community that I don't want to go on for the half hour it would probably take to properly and respectfully do that. But I would like to present him with a token of our appreciation before the council. If you would indulge me, Mr. Kimmey, if you would come up here, please. We have these little picture frames, if you will. They have a calendar on one side, but we've prepared a little certificate on the other side just to thank you. So appreciate your service. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Also, I want to recognize Dr. Don Wilson. Dr. Don Wilson has been the chair of the Department of Pediatrics at Scott & White for many years. He's also a pediatric endocrinologist, and so our community has been very benefited by his service, and not only in terms of his profession, but also in terms of his service in the community, including the Parks Foundation. And so I would like to also recognize him. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll be hearing back from us in the not-so-distant future about some of our additional initiatives that we're planning for the new year. So I look forward to being able to report to you next year. Thank you.
Alan, thank you for bringing that to us. Dr. Wilson and Charlie, congratulations, and thank you for service to our community, the continued service that both of you provide, and I know you'll continue to provide in other ways. And so thanks for all you do. And the next item is a presentation from Bell County Judge John Burroughs and Sharon Long, the tax assessor collector of Bell County with child safety funds.
And also have Commissioner 3 Precinct Eddie Lang here with us, too. Members of the council and staff, Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas. As you recall, back in 2001, the Bell County Commissioners Court passed a resolution to collect a $1.50 registration fee for child safety, and we've been collecting that since that date. And the allocation for Temple for the fiscal year ending on September 30th for this last year is $73,754.06. We have a check to you in that amount of it. As you will recall, this money can be used for a number of programs, school crossing guard programs, or if you don't have one of those, you can spend it on programs for child safety, health, nutrition, including child abuse prevention, intervention, and drug and alcohol abuse prevention programs on that. Since we initiated this program, which is something Bell County is not required to do, but does and collects the money and serves as the conduit to you, we have brought to the city of Temple $505,656.59. And we're pleased to do so. And Sharon does have a check here, and it is not a drywall contractor check this year. You know, we've been able to upgrade our check on that, so we know it's good. But I'd like to also point out that we appreciate the cooperation we have with the City of Temple and our other cities in our 911 Communications Center out there, because we're able to do much more together as a team than any of us could do individually. And Bell County believes so strongly in that program, we pay the first 50% of the cost of the Communications Center. And an example of how that helps the taxpayers of Temple and the City of Temple, if the cost of running that center is based upon actual usage, allocation based on usage, the cost of Temple would be $1.2 million. Bell County picks up the first 50%, so as a result, the proportional share to Temple is $606,000. Still a good amount of money, but it's half what the cost would be if it was based on actual usage on that. But we are the envy of most places. It's probably not a week does not go by that we have people contact us to say, now, how are you doing that? How are you able to jointly manage this? How can you get the cities to work together with the county on this? And I think we should be very proud that we have a state-of-the-art that is getting better, and the fact that we can do things others can't do, and we've been doing it for about 10 years now, I think is a real tribute to the cooperation and the joint effort we have here within Bell County. Bell County is a good place to live. Temple's a good place to live, right? And Sharon does have the check, and if you can hold it until Tuesday, that'd be good.
It is my pleasure to bring this check to you. I don't deserve all the credit, though, for this. I have a wonderful staff that is there every day that meets the taxpayers face to face, and they should get a lot of the recognition for this as well. Thank you.
Once again, this is just a great example of cooperation between governments, and it takes all of us to make this area the best place to live in the state of Texas. And it's a great pleasure for us to be able to present this to you. And if any of you would like to experience that pleasure, we still have enough time to get you on the agenda for Monday if you'd like to present us a check. Thank you very much.
Hearing no response, we'll see you.
Tracy wants to actually take possession of that.
Well, Judge, like you, many people call us and ask, how do we do what we do? And it's through cooperation and partnerships, many organizations and entities, both governmental and non-governmental, working together to just work to make this a better community, a better county, and better for all the citizens that we have the privilege of serving. And so it works, and anybody can copy it that wants to. It is not a trade secret, but unfortunately, not enough people do it.
You're right. I have a lot of dealings with your staff, and you have an excellent staff of Tracy and David and Jonathan and excellent fire chief. Alonzo was absolutely great, and Gary on police, and so you are fortunate to have the dedicated professionals you have that help make the city of Temple the great place it is. So thank y'all again.
Now, Judge, Commissioner Lang, and Susan, thank you very much, or Sharon, I'm sorry. And Merry Christmas to all of you. Appreciate it. Merry Christmas. Cash that right away tomorrow. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. All those items listed under this section, consent, are considered to be routine by the City Council and may be enacted by one motion. If discussion is desired by the council on any item, it may be removed from the consent agenda at the request of a council member, and it will be considered separately. This is item 4A through S. Are there any items, council, that you wish to be removed from consent for individual vote or discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion on item 4A through S.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda. If there's no further discussion, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter?
Aye.
Councilmember Jansen?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Linda?
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider?
Aye.
Mayor Jones?
Aye. Item 5 is a fourth reading and a public hearing. Consider adopting an ordinance renewing the franchise agreement with Atmos Energy Corporation. Mr. Graham.
Mayor and members of the council, this is the fourth reading of an ordinance granting a franchise agreement to Atmos Energy. Clyde had asked me before the meeting if I was trying to set a record on the number of readings for an ordinance, and I am not. Under our charter, franchise ordinances do require 3 readings. In the course of doing that and visiting with Atmos and Doug Hill, who is here tonight from Atmos, we have tried to improve the ordinance a little bit, and I'll take some credit for the delay there, and it needs to be reviewed fully by their staff, and we would ask that you go ahead and reopen the public hearing, keep it open after today's meeting, but if you're so inclined to table the item, and I think Mr. Hill would like to make that request as well during the public hearing, but we are moving forward. We think we can improve the ordinance a little bit. We would still propose to approve it on the final reading in January with an effective date of January 1st, 2009. I think it may have said 2008 in one portion of the packet, but it's 2009, and it does require a public hearing. We ask that you keep it open as well, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Council, any questions before we go to public hearing? If not, we will reopen the public hearing. We suspended the public hearing last time. Anyone wishing to speak before the council on this item, please come forward and state your name and address for the record prior to making your comment.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, City staff. My name's Doug Hill with Atmos Energy, and our office is 1500 West Loop 340 in Waco, Texas. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening, and I'd like to echo the remarks of Mr. Graham, other than I didn't know we were trying to set a record either. But we truly are enjoying a great working relationship with Mr. Graham and his folks, and because we are trying to improve the document for the betterment of the city and Atmos Energy, we respectfully request that you table any discussion on that at this time. Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Hill? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone?
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak before the council on this item? Seeing no one else wishing to speak, I'll once again suspend the public hearing until this is brought back before the council. We'll anticipate seeing this again in our next meeting in mid-January. And I'll entertain a motion on this item from the council to table as requested.
Motion to table item 5 on the fourth reading.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Further discussion? There being none, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter?
Aye.
Councilmember Jansen?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Linda?
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider?
Aye.
Mayor Jones?
Aye. Next item is a second reading to consider adopting an ordinance amending Chapter 7 Buildings of the Code of Ordinances to add landscape irrigation ordinance as Article 7, consistent with the ordinance language, complying with Texas Commission on Environmental Quality requirements and the City of Temple water protection goals. Mr. Graham, you want to open up with that?
I'd like to make a couple of remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Houston. Following our first reading of this ordinance, following your direction, we have held a series of meetings, 2 meetings that I'm aware of with stakeholder groups in the community. We also met had telephone conversations and attended at least one meeting with representatives from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality about some of the issues associated with this ordinance. I think those discussions have been successful, and we have tweaked the ordinance a little bit for you today, and we'll turn it over to Ms. Houston at this point to give you a presentation on it. And I think we're also going to hear from the engineering staff with some comments as well.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Ms. Houston.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Once again, as we discussed during the last council meeting, this is an ordinance that's mandated by the state law and TCEQ regulations, requires licensing of irrigation system installers, permitting of irrigation systems, inspections of installations, and backflow prevention devices. As Mr. Graham was pointing out, we did consult with TCEQ personnel via telephone and attended a kind of a area-wide meeting in Killeen with TCEQ folks. We met several times with local stakeholders, the irrigation system installers in Taba, and we really appreciate their involvement and their interest in this matter. And I think we got a lot of good feedback and ideas. I think that we're all now in agreement that the irrigated lawns are health hazards or high-risk areas because of pesticides, fertilizers, and animal waste, and that accordingly double-check valve assemblies just are not appropriate in these kinds of irrigation systems. There's a couple areas I want to follow up on because I know that they generated some discussion last time, and that's going to be backflow prevention, the permitting of individual homeowners and the kind of exemptions and requirements that are in them on the ordinance, and some suggestions as to how we might change our ordinance, water pressure issues, inspections generally, and when upgrading of the existing systems becomes necessary. Under the model ordinance, under TCEQ rules, homeowners are not required to be licensed in order to install a landscape irrigation system in their own home. There are some requirements for homeowner installed systems that are in the ordinance. Spacing sprinkler heads according to the manufacturer's published recommendation, water pressure requirements, that they can't spray water over impervious surfaces, that they have to have rain or moisture shut-off devices or some other kind of technology that takes care of that issue, that there must be an isolation valve, and in the model ordinance recommended by TCEQ, homeowners do not have to submit any kind of a plan. The TCEQ public drinking water rules, which aren't part of this ordinance, but they're separate rules, require an appropriate backflow prevention device and that the device is tested when it's installed. If a homeowner actually hires another person to come into their house, their yard, to assist in the installation of the irrigation system, that takes them out of this exemption. It's no longer a homeowner installation. It's an assisted installation, I guess, and they must meet all the requirements of Chapter 344 at that point. Homeowners are encouraged to use a licensed irrigator to obtain an irrigation plan to maximize water conservation. So it's not just a matter of protecting the potable water supply, it's also a matter of conserving water, especially in the summer months when we have, drought issues. The city can set more stringent standards if they choose to do so. The recommended ordinance requires homeowners to get a permit from the city and submit a system plan. Staff would emphasize that a landscape irrigator installer or landscape technician must connect the backflow prevention device. And staff is suggesting at this point that we add the following language to the exemption section. A home or property owner must obtain a permit from the city, submit an irrigation plan, use an individual with a valid license to install backflow prevention, and submit test results of the backflow prevention device to the city. Now, as I said before, these are more stringent standards. They're not required by TCEQ, and so I just want to make sure that we understand that. And then the next area of concern last time was, of course, the backflow prevention devices. And we had some discussion about the reduced pressure zones versus the double check valves. We're kind of at the same place, and we think that we've gotten a lot of feedback from the regulated community. Air gaps cost more and are just not practical. pressure vacuum breakers and atmospheric vacuum breakers are being phased out in plumbing codes. Installers in the city, the regulated community, didn't seem to raise concerns about removing PVBs and AVBs from the ordinance, which is what we were recommending at the last council meeting. The approved backflow prevention devices that are in this current ordinance are the air gaps and reduced pressure principal backflow prevention assemblies. Double check valves cannot be used because in the case of health hazards. Although the TCEQ only views chemicals as health hazards, the plumbing code adopted by the city includes the presence of fertilizers and pet waste as a health hazard. When double check valves fail, fertilizer chemicals, including pesticides and pet waste, can get into the potable water system. Reduced pressure zone assemblies allow water to drain out of the bottom of the assembly, not into the potable water system. Because of the upgrade requirements that even double check valves, if we adopted this section that was in the model ordinance, they have a lot of upgrades that have to be done to them. And so at the end of the day, after a lot of discussion with the irrigators, I think that the figure was it's going to cost about $100 more to have an RPZ as opposed to a double check valve. And RPZs will be more visible and above ground, and so when people are going out for their yearly inspections or to check the system, they're going to be able to find it. Sometimes I think that's a problem with the double check valves, is they can't find where they've been put. And I'm going to go ahead and let Nicole Trava talk about the water pressure issues.
Okay, one of the concerns that was brought up during our discussions with the stakeholders was the condition and the system pressures of our current system. Now, our current water system is based upon elevations that have been established by the elevated storage tanks in our city, as well as the booster pump stations. So those pressures are pretty well set, and generally we like to have system pressures between about 45 pounds and 80 or 90 pounds. 2CQ law, Chapter 290, which is the other set of rules, mandates that we keep a pressure above 35 pounds per square inch in the system. So there is some flexibility there, and in some parts of our city, due to the topography and the elevations of our elevated tanks, we are between the 35 and 50 pounds. After talking with some of the irrigators, they have brought up to us that if there is a system that's installed in those areas of the city that are less than 45 pounds, that could cause somewhat of an issue on the irrigation side, possibly requiring installation of booster pumps because there's just not enough pressure. And when you talk about RPZs versus double checks, a double check valve would generally have about a 4-pound drop across the device, whereas an RPZ would be more along the lines of 9 or 10 pounds. So there is a difference between the double checks and RPZs. So we have kind of talked with the community and talked internally about the ability, especially on new systems. Right now, we would generally tap a 3/4 inch or a 1 inch, and what we've talked about for new installations is just straight going to the 1 inch tap. And what that will do is it will minimize the head loss across that device. So internally, we've talked about making that change, and I think that's one that we can do fairly easily. The difficulty comes with the existing systems that are on already on the system that fall in those areas that are less than 50 pounds, and the community wanted to know if there was a possibility of looking at addressing those situations. If a system required a modification and was required to upgrade from a double check to an RPZ, it may require tapping that existing system with a new tap if it was already a 3/4 inch. So there may be some additional cost. And right now those fees are established by ordinance, and the cost for a 3/4 inch is $390, and for a 1 inch is $410. So that is a cost that may actually come into the equation when we're dealing with existing systems in certain parts of the city. So that is out there. There's really not a lot of ability within our system to just increase the pressures across the board because they are established by those existing facilities.
We talked a little about the inspections and fees during the last council meeting as well. We're currently charging $5 for a lawn sprinkler with 5 heads and 50 cents per additional head. Staff recommends charging $25 for an irrigation permit. It's higher than what we're charging now, but it's lower than some other cities are charging. I've been sort of researching that issue, and other cities are in the same position we are in. They're kind of looking at their ordinances right now, but a lot of cities are suggesting around $100 for a permit fee, which would be significantly higher than what we're doing. But $25 because of the increase in staff time may be appropriate. Section 7-113 requires inspection from the beginning to the end of installation, but 713 and TCEQ's rules are silent about what level of inspection is necessary. It's up to the city to decide the level of inspection, and in the last fiscal year, 154 irrigation systems were permitted. Of course, there might be some that nobody pulled permits on, but that was about the level of systems. And we don't have figures as to whether or not those were all new systems or how many of those were older systems. But 154 were the amount that were permitted last year. We are recommending a combination of self-reporting and spot checks, but we would like to formulate an inspection procedure and we'll work with the stakeholders to develop an inspection policy. Upgrading requirements. This is another concern, I think, for homeowners, is when are you going to have to go in there and actually, upgrade your system? From what the TCEQ is saying on its fact page and other information that we've been able to gather, upgrading will only apply in certain circumstances which are considered major repairs. As proposed, two of the triggering events that would mandate upgrading are if an irrigation system is connected to a potable water supply and the maintenance of the system requires opening to the atmosphere of the irrigation main line at any point prior to the discharge side of the irrigation zone control valve, then the system must be connected through an improved, properly installed backflow prevention device. If an existing controller is replaced, a rain or moisture sensor or other technology that's designed to interrupt the operation of an irrigation system during periods of rain must be installed. And there are also some language about isolation valves when you're doing some kinds of maintenance work too. The changes that staff is recommending are, the first group is what we recommended last time as well. Delete the following definitions from section 7-100, atmospheric vacuum breaker, double check valve, and pressure vacuum breaker. In the packet that you guys have, we made an error and crossed out number 26, which is not the one we want to get rid of. That was our error. And 36 is the one that we're recommending get stricken. And we also are recommending deleting section 7-103B3 and B4, which would allow pressure vacuum breakers and atmospheric vacuum breakers. We're also recommending clarification wording to 7-101. And I'm going to put the actual language up on the screen after the presentation. And we're recommending adopting the ordinance with these changes. And I'm available for any questions, as is Nicole.
Do you have that other language that you wanted to put up?
The yellow portion, the highlighted portion, is the addition. And as I said earlier, this is more stringent than TCEQ requires, and it's also optional. It's the city's decision to make if they want to make it more stringent or not.
And that is basically requiring a homeowner installed to get a permit. Mm-hmm. But is that requiring them
to get a plan,
to have a licensed or some type of licensed installer to do their plan?
Yes, I think that's the requirement, and also that they have to just to submit an irrigation plan. But my understanding from reading the rules is that irrigation plans do have to be done by licensed.
The rules where? TCEQ rules, or because somebody can turn in a plan?
Well, and I would suggest if it's optional that they do it at all, I think we could define the level of that.
Right, I think that's true. I mean,
if it's optional, that they're required to turn in a stamped plan or whatever by a.
They have to turn in some sort of.
They have to turn
in. Inspect and how much water goes where, and you make a determination.
Whether you have a seal.
Out of those 154 permits, how many of those were just do-it-yourselfers?
I don't think we have the data for that. We were discussing that when we got the number, and we're not sure how many of those were new systems, like builders came in and did a subdivision, and those were those, as opposed to do-it-yourselfers. I don't think that there probably were many do-it-yourselfers who got a permit. But that's just speculation. It would have to be a licensed irrigator. Okay. It would have to be a licensed irrigator would have to submit a plan. I think that's by rule.
And so they would have to submit a plan or to a homeowner or purchase the plan, and then the homeowner could go at that time get a permit and install it themselves without the exception of the
backflow prevention device, which they'd have to get done by a licensed person and tested. But under the rules, because the backflow prevention, even without this part of it that we've added, backflow prevention, they still have to get that tested properly and installed properly.
So how would you know that? I mean, what would trigger that? The permit from the...
Yeah, they've got a permit, then we know that they're supposed to be doing those things.
So they get a permit, and then they hire somebody to come put their backflow preventer in, and they'd say at that time, I mean, what's going to trigger you to come down and inspect it?
Right now, it's generally a self-reporting process, and what we do is we have one staff member on the public works side that receives those reports from the person that's performing the inspection, which would be the licensed irrigator. So we receive that report, and it's right now it's self-reporting, and that's what Robin referred to. We would be looking at establishing a policy to figure out what level of inspection the city would then take and whether or not there would be additional inspection required. But right now, we're just relying on that licensed person to send the paperwork in, and therefore we know that it is in compliance with the law.
So they're not being required. So everyone is not going to require a city inspection. We're going to spot check, and so they don't have to keep it uncovered. They can cover it up and check it, and the city will spot check.
Yeah, and I think it's there's going to be some coordination that has to be done also on the building permit side. With Richard Terrio's office, since they go out and do the inspections for the electrical and plumbing, and so some of those spot inspections will be done by his staff as well. So we haven't worked out all the details on exactly how the policy will be adopted, and that's what Robin referred to with us working with the stakeholders to resolve some of those issues.
I'd still say, like we talked about in a workshop, I'm not trying to put another burden on a homeowner or the do-it-yourselfer wanting to work in their yard and install a system. But we are talking about our potable water that the city drinks. And to me, if you have a licensed irrigator, they're trained to do what they do and put the heads where they put them, put the backflow preventers in correctly and all that stuff. And when you have a homeowner that may not be as trained or be trained at all, more than likely, that they don't have a license, put this in, I just think that's not good. And I think they have to have a plan. They can go get their own permit. They can put half of it in themselves. But they can't put this in. It's so complicated. To me, it's just very simple to say you have to be a licensed irrigator to install a system to get a permit. And I would venture to say there's probably not that many folks in town that put their own system in. But that's just my opinion. I think when you deal with the water we drink, I don't think there'd be anybody in the city of Temple that would disagree with that.
But the backflow inhibitor is what keeps the stuff from going into the water system, and nobody's debating the necessity of the backflow inhibitor, and that has to be done by a licensed person as well as inspected or spot inspected. And my concern is just like the homeowners have the right now to work on their house doing their own electrical or plumbing or other things on their own property. I think this is, that's a right that they have as homeowners, and it seems to me to be an extra step in taking away a right that they have when the inhibitor is already everybody's agreed to and it's there.
Yeah, I understand on the electrical, but if you wire your house improperly and it burns down, it's not going to affect me. But if you screw up the water, I'm going to drink, it's going to affect a lot of people. And that's just where I'm at with it. And if it's inspected, then they take it from there. Who's to say what they're going to do in the meantime between there? Can I do it? Well, I think I can, so I'll just whatever.
But if the inhibitor's in place, nothing can get into the pit.
So if when we issue a permit, and we'll assume every homeowner that's going to do this is going to get a permit, of course. So, and if they aren't going to, whether we pass this or not. And so we can't affect that. But we'll assume, because we're going to make it an ordinance, that they're going to do that, of course. And when they do that, if, as a condition of getting that permit, they have to bring a plan, and it's okay if they draw it up, I'm suggesting. But they also have to bring who is the licensed installer that's going to put in their backflow check valve. And at that point, gives us the information to be able to verify that that's done.
Who's going to check, Mayor, that the pressure that they have on that line is going to run their system, of which they drew out on a piece of paper, effectively, like we talked about, conserving water and all those types of things? Who's going to know? Who's going to do? Is it a permit lady, or is the staff going to have to go see if that works?
Is that what we're requiring? That it's an efficient system? I know that's a desire, because water is a precious resource and all that kind of stuff, and we'd like it to be the most efficient system that you can possibly have. But again, it's a homeowner wanting to, work on his own home. And so what is it that we're trying to control and require?
The ordinance, even without the language that we're suggesting, already requires that they use the proper water pressure for the system. That's already in there.
Okay. Our big issue, TSEC's big issue, is the backflow pressure.
I agree.
Protection of the water supply.
And water conservation, too. But the protecting the water supply, water quality is always a public health issue.
I think what we're going to do is push people to put in their own systems. They're not going to bother getting the permit if they're going to put them in themselves, because they don't want to pay a professional to do it. And then we lose all ability to get that. That's my personal opinion. So, other questions or comments from council or staff?
Just a quick question for Nicole. The actual tap coming off the main to where the meter would be, are they typically all the same size?
No, sir. Generally, for just a residential potable water line, it's a 3/4 inch. What we're talking about for an irrigation line, we're looking at 1 inch. And then if you have a commercial, it's generally 2 inch. It could be a 2 inch or greater.
Okay.
It's kind of specific to the type of business or residence that's being served, and that's generally, we put in what the resident or the property owner requests. So. And I also might note that anybody that touches the public system must be licensed for TCEQ requirements with a water license under the 290 rules. So right now, in any case, nobody can just dig a hole and tap into our system.
Sure.
Seems like the tap will be put in when they put the backflow. I mean, that's when you would have a licensed person tap it as well.
Well, where I was going with that, I thought that there were different size taps, but let's say that your original home was built with a 3/4 inch tap and the meter's there, and now you decide you want to put a sprinkler system in. It's not just changing that meter out and putting it in. You really need to have a larger tap.
And that was
in order to get the volume.
That was the intent of that one slide, basically saying on older systems that may be the case. There's a 3/4, and what will need to be done to make the system work functionally is a 1 inch. So you're going to have that additional cost, and I think that's what some of the stakeholders were saying. Is there any flexibility there on helping with that? So,
well, are there not still people that with sizable yards that will actually put their sprinklers on a separate meter, so they do not have to pay the sewer charge on the water sprinkler?
We see that quite often, and that is generally a very good practice. I think our water department is seeing that more frequently now, and that is certainly something that we will do when requested. And
so that would be maybe a lot of those situations on how they would do that, and not have to pay the sewer on it.
And there's no question that there's a risk on a homeowner putting in their own system and it not be done correctly or not work correctly, but homeowners take that risk every day.
True.
But
things they do on their own.
Stops the stuff from getting into the line.
The backflow thing is the part we're saying has got to be done, has to be installed by a licensed plumber or whatever, or technician or whatever it is. It's got to be.
And if it's under pressure,
so
their grass is going to be dead. I mean, it's not going to work right. They're going to know real quick if it's not working right.
And they may have to do it again. That's the risk they take. unless we tell them that they have to have it installed by a licensed technician or a licensed firm.
So, so there would have to be, if a motion is made to pass this, but take out, because the one we have in front of us requires the homeowner to submit a stamp plan, correct? So
Correct.
that's,
Where does it say that? You keep saying the rules say, where in the rules? And is it TSEC rules or is
It's
it?
TSEC rules, and I don't have it off the top of
Okay,
my head.
so it is a
but it's
TSEC rule.
rules.
You just keep referring to the rules, and I don't know what it's
Not-
saying. Okay, or is it City of Temple, or is it
is it
something
in the
you're
ordinance that you're
proposing we put in?
proposing? Is it in the ordinance?
It might be in the the rules for the licensed irrigators, because they have a set of rules that aren't in the city municipal, what they have to do in order to comply with their licensing, but I'd have to refer that question.
We need to know what we're voting on.
The irrigators, in order to get
Please, come.
an irrigation license.
Please, are you a professional? Or-
Let me. This is Eric Wright. He is on Public Works staff. He's in our
Okay,
he's in our
great, thank
utility
you. He's city
department.
staff. Okay, I'm
This
sorry.
is the one Public
Okay.
Works person that we have, and he checks all the backflow devices and grease traps. But he is kind of our professional on staff to deal with this. So I'm going to let him answer the
Super.
technical
Yeah,
questions.
if you'll come up front with the mic, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. How are you doing? When you become a licensed irrigator, you have to take a class. We have a separate set of rules in order to get that license. TCEQ does not specify that it has to be stamped, but if an irrigator puts it in, they have to have it stamped. Charles Walton from TWA is also here if you have any questions about backflow preventers.
So what you're saying is you do not have to have a stamped plan to put an irrigation system in, unless you are a licensed irrigator.
The homeowner does not. If you're a professional, you do. Now, in order to install a backflow device, a licensed individual has to install that, and a licensed backflow technician has to test it once a year.
And I would suspect that's a TECQ rule, right?
Yes, sir.
And so if that's a rule, why wouldn't you want an engineered plan on that? TECQ says you have to have that. Why would you want that? I mean, it
As for
doesn't make
homeowners
sense.
that want to put it in themselves, and they want to know
But
what
there's
should
a
have to be
reason
a
for
license.
that.
And- Well, sure.
There's a reason for that. And if
understand
that's what
that.
we're trying to accomplish,
I mean, I guess the question is, what are we trying to accomplish? In that the
Check the
system
water.
is going to come and feed into the backflow and then go into the water system, and that's what needs to be done. And can a regular plumber do that as well, or is it an
A
irrigator?
licensed plumber can install a backflow device.
So it doesn't even have to be an irrigator. So
No, sir.
Somebody can contact a plumber, have them put the backflow device in, and if that's who they notify us as who's going to do it, then we can.
Correct. When the licensed
Sure.
plumber will install it, then a licensed backflow technician has to test it. The technician fills out a test and maintenance report. When they fill that out, they agree, they sign it, say that it's installed properly.
So I'm assuming a plumber that's licensed, could you be a licensed plumber and not a licensed backflow inspector?
Yes, sir.
So most irrigators are all licensed backflow inspectors.
No, sir.
So do we have any licensed backflow inspectors?
We have quite a few licensed backflow technicians here in the city.
What's their profession generally?
They range from plumbers to irrigators.
Okay.
It's a wide range. Some of them are just, all they do is test backflow. They don't do irrigation work, they don't do plumbing work.
So you literally have, that's some things, okay. Never seen that
Well, I guess I would comment, there's backflow preventers installed all over town. All the laundries have them, and that sort of thing, and typically those would be installed by plumbers.
Okay.
so if you're an individual and you get a permit, you go hire somebody to put your deal in. Who says, okay, does the homeowner says, Mr. City, I've got it installed, come look at it?
Usually the plumber pulls the permit to install the device. And then we inspect when.
But then who pulls the permits to install the system? So you got two different permits?
Currently, most people don't pull permits to install their irrigation systems. On occasion, new construction, mostly are the ones
they're
that see pull
supposed to.
permits. Correct.
So if somebody pulls a permit for a backflow preventer for an irrigation system, that should say, we better go check and see if they're going to pull a permit for the irrigation system, correct?
Yes, sir.
But if they're not going to pull the permit for the irrigation system,
So let's just still-
they very well aren't going to put a backflow preventer in there, or if they do, they're going to install it themselves.
Correct. Or they know they're going to get caught, because then the plumber's going to call in the permit. And you can go all the way down the
People
road.
build additions on their house without permit.
It'd take more staff time to go try to
Everything.
run that down as to just say, be licensed and be done with it. And there's still going to be those, I agree with you, there's still, that's going to be regardless. But, but if Mr. Graham's up on a stand testifying, we say, you got to be licensed, period, in the city of Temple. But it'd be a lot easier to say that than, well, the homeowner can put it in. I didn't know he screwed with this deal over here, and it messed it up, and we got 10 people sick over here. I mean,
We don't know today.
If the
How many of them are
backflow
installed that way?
I understand.
Okay.
in the backflow inhibitor, like Marty just said, is used in all kinds of commercial applications for the same reason, to protect the water supply. It's depended upon, it's assumed that this is good technology and it works. If it is installed by one, then the water system is protected on the sprinkler system. That's the goal right now, is what we're trying to do. Protect the water system and get these things put in. If it becomes that we have an issue, I think, that we need to revisit this, I'm all for revisiting it, but I would rather figure out and deal with the specific issue at hand, protecting the water system, getting them put in,
And conserving water.
And then let's, through the process, let's see how many home installed systems we get requests for, permits, and see how it works. And if we've got to shore this up, then we can do that. Because right now, we have no idea.
Correct.
Correct? That was a statement that was made. Of the 154, we have no idea how many of them were professionally installed.
We have
Or were
154
all of
that were
those professionally
permitted.
installed?
Correct. We have 154 that were permitted
Okay.
this last year.
And some of those could have been home installed?
Yes, sir.
Installed?
Some of those could have been homeowners.
tapping into the lines and
They do not make the tap. Usually the Public Works Department makes the tap. And we put the meter in and they connect to the meter.
That's in it. So they put their own system in without a permit, but we're giving them the tap. So I mean, there are things in there that help us.
You said they had a permit.
This is the 154 that has the permit.
Okay.
It's just,
And they had a permit.
then they install, from the meter, they install the backflow.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But if somebody does one without a permit, they still got to get the line tapped.
They have to pull a permit in order to get a tap. and a
Right.
meter.
So that's what I mean. There are opportunities to catch this in the process for people who don't have a permit.
Yes, sir. A lot of individuals use the existing meter. And they have their domestic and their irrigation on the same meter. In those cases, we don't get a permit.
So back to what we're voting on today, in the ordinance, what if we want to remove the is there something actually in there saying they have to have a stamp plan to get a permit?
No, it says submit an irrigation plan, and my understanding was that if you submit an irrigation plan, it has to be stamped, but it doesn't say that, and now from what Mr. Wright's saying, I'm not sure that that's the case.
It depends on who draws the plan. If an irrigator draws the plan, it does have to be
But the issue is homeowner.
Right.
correct. Homeowners can draw.
But I imagine I imagine we could reject an irrigation plan if it was submitted to us and it was woefully if it just didn't.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely. So we can then we can
Not
accomplish
issues.
that and vote on this, and we haven't closed that door for homeowners with the permit issue. That's my question. So what you're saying is you can reject it, but we're not requiring a stamp.
That's what I'm saying.
With that in mind, then I would make a motion to approve this ordinance.
There were also the strikeouts that we
I think
talked about the
we need
last
some
time.
clarification about the strikeout of the two backflow devices.
Okay.
Maybe go back to her slide, and whether we're including that other language.
We were suggesting deleting the three definitions, numbers 2, 10, and 36, atmospheric vacuum breaker, double check valve, pressure vacuum breaker, as well as 7-103B3 and B4, which referred to the pressure vacuum breakers and atmospheric vacuum breakers. And those strikeouts, other than the 26 is incorrectly stricken in the package, but those were in the package. struck through in the ordinance.
So the question is, do you wish to delete those definitions, delete those two backflow prevention devices, the second bullet, and do you wish to add that clarifying language that she had in yellow to the section about exemptions? And that's what we need as part of the motion, if you wish to do any of those things.
Council, do you want to hear from local professionals?
Sure. I was going to ask you one question. When you say that if it's not a good design, how are you going to know it's not a good design? I mean, what would make you reject the plan?
Well, I hope I'm not going to be the
person.
That's illegal now. It's yours.
But
okay.
Who's gonna
I would call up, Eric or Nicole.
Yeah, but who would make that call in the city?
I think the people that we have who are actually licensed to deal with irrigation systems, and I know that Eric is. I think we have somebody in. We have plumbing folks in code enforcement and construction safety, so there are a number of people who are qualified to actually look at the plans.
Okay, I'm going to open this up for public comment. Anyone wishing to speak for the council on this item, please come forward and state your name and address for the record, and we're certainly encouraging, I think we've got some professionals in the audience to comment about the backflow inhibitors, preventers, and what are your thoughts on that, if you have any? Otherwise, we'll go with what we have.
Tony Gallagher, Hard Texas Landscape Company, to answer any questions you may have. A couple issues I thought about with the permitting. $25 at a flat fee because it didn't say anything after that.
Right now, it's a flat fee in the code. It's $25 plus 50 cents per additional head. So it's just raising
Save
the
me some money.
$5. It's raising from the $5. So.
That's probably going to save me money, so I applaud that.
That's not part of this.
But that's not part of this. It's going to have to be passed with separate resolution. That's our recommendation right now. Sorry.
You blew it.
Yeah, I know. Backflow devices, the RPZ, which is the high hazard, and that's what the staff recommends to go with. It is recommended by the utilities and the water code is the high hazard one. Hopefully they'll have some new ones out, but like anything else, they can fail. They will be above ground for sight and for freeze problems, which King's Daughters we were at last night, and had one fail inside of an insulated box, and it wasn't irrigation, but they called us out there. We turned it off and shut the hospital down without water, but they made it through that. And those things are going to happen with all these inhibitors. They're there to protect the water supply. All these old houses out here that are 50 years old were built great, but you're not going to have any type of backflow device on those. You can have the water drain back from water hoses, anything else if it's just right, or the fire trucks when they come in, hook up to the fire plugs, they create a tremendous amount of back pressure. So whatever y'all do, we've got to do something to protect the water supply and our drinking water. And the recommendations right now, RPZ versus double check. There's pros and cons on everything, but I'm hoping soon we have some new devices out there that are better than what we have to look forward from right now.
So you don't see that as inhibiting or a problem to eliminate, and take staff's recommendation to eliminate the use of the double check, the atmospheric breaker, or the pressure vacuum breaker?
Right. It's going to happen, so I give up that fight.
Okay. Other questions, Mr. Gallagher?
Mayor, I found it educational. We had a meeting and we have those devices here, and if you're a guy, you might appreciate just looking at them. These are pretty substantial devices.
You want to see one, don't you?
This is a double check here. This is a testable double check valve.
Could you come to the microphone? Yeah, sure. Thanks.
This is a testable double check, and what this is you have a check valve on one side and a check valve on the other, and this piece in the middle has no outlet. And the test part is right here, so Basically, what would happen is if this fails, you wouldn't know, and the water could flow back, and you wouldn't know any difference because it's just a straight piece of pipe. There are double check valves that are not testable, which would mean you wouldn't have these test cocks here, and those are even worse. So a double check that is testable, you would be able to determine it if you tested it, but there's no outlet here for the water. And this one here is an RPZ, and the difference is you have this down drain in the middle, so if the device fails, the water, instead of going back into the system, will just fall out the bottom. So that's basically right, and it's above ground, so that's basically the main difference. So you can see that pretty well, and they're pretty heavy devices. So
It's like a overflow on a hot water heater or something. You're going to know when that because the water's coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. There are no questions. Thanks, Tom.
Thank y'all.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Anyone else wish to comment? Seeing no one else wishing to speak, I'll declare the public hearing closed. Council, have what you need.
So if we would made a motion, I guess I would amend that motion to remove the three the vacuum breaker, the check valve, and the pressure vacuum breaker, and delete section 7103B3 and B4, and we would clarify exemptions that would require homeowners to submit a plan. And
That last item is the item,
The
is
yellow
language you have in
highlighted.
yellow, and that's what you spent a lot of time.
But we talked about, we want them to submit a plan when they require a permit. We just aren't requiring that it be a stamped plan. So that would be my motion.
Okay. Motion is give enough clarity, basically adopting what you're recommending. Okay.
And if I could ask a quick question, will his motion then meet the TCEQ requirements?
Yes, because we're going over and above on the homeowners. It's more stringent, and we're allowed to do that. So that would meet TCEQ's requirements.
Is there a second?
second.
We have a motion and a second. One thing we talked about last time when we discussed this was the possibility on the a homeowner installed system of having that permit fee be greater because of the fact that we would want to make sure we go out and do the inspections in that one.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a professionally installed is basically self-policed.
Correct.
Okay, and so I would, and I know we're not setting rates or permit fees right now, but I would certainly suggest we consider that when we implement that by resolution. We have a motion and a second. Other comments or questions? There being none, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter?
Aye.
Councilmember Jansak?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Linda?
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider?
No.
Mayor Jones?
Aye. Thanks to all of you who are here on that item and appreciate your participation and your assistance as we work that through the system, both tonight and prior to the presentation. Next item, item 7, consider adopting a resolution regarding an appeal from MW Builders for an exception to section 13300 masonry standards, City of Temple zoning ordinance regarding the 70% masonry requirement for the future MW Builders office building at 1701 North General Bruce Drive. Mr. Dalton.
Good, Mayor and City Council, this is the first appeal that we have regarding this ordinance. The aerial to your left shows the site in proximity to Interstate 35. The ordinance was passed on April 17th, so essentially 7 months to almost the date as you are considering your first appeal. This building is seen from Interstate 35, which is designated as a strategic investment corridor for which the ordinance applies. There was some information provided to you in your workshop this evening, which is reflected in the table to your left. And essentially the ordinance applies to the front, side, and rear building sides or elevations of a building. The ordinance that was passed in April requires 70% masonry, which can consider numerous materials on all the sides. What the Planning Department is charged with administrating the ordinance. We had looked at trying to ensure that 70% masonry would be reflected on the front side, but looked at administrative allowances for the side and the rears, and that would be less than the 70% because of the view from the corridors, with the idea of some increased landscaping to mitigate the 7% difference, and then looked at the idea for another administrative exception on the rear of the site for 51%, because as you can see with the aerial, that you have approximately anywhere between a 6 to 8 foot high berm separating the site from the multiple lane railroad tracks that are anywhere between 16 and 18 tracks to the rear. So that's where we looked at for the 51% for the rear facade. The applicant did submit some information yesterday evening and was provided to you with it, and so some of the percentages change from 51 to 59% along the front and from 63 to 65% along the sides, and I think there was greater attention to detail by the applicant, Tim Chadwick, president of MW Builders, and Todd Winterman, the estimator, and in consultation with Architectural Edge, the architects. And so they had looked at trying to bring that through the review, and I think essentially what had been done from talking with Tim, and he could certainly speak to the hearing this evening, is that the reason why the percentages increase, if the council remembers, you do not count your windows or your doors as part of your elevation for your 70%, and that's why that 8% increase changed on the front and the rear, and then also along the sides to go along with that. And so essentially a couple of elevations that were provided by MW Builders with Tim Chadwick and Todd Winterman, which were very hospitable to work with. This shows the front elevation as if it were 70% masonry on the front facade, and essentially you'll notice the difference between this elevation and the next one is that the EFIS, the insulated foam system, would come up to the second story windows there. If it were looked to try to be able to look at the 70% frontage on the side, the landscape plan that was submitted, staff would recommend that it would be amended. If you look at the green cloud there for the added trees, it would be looked to try to mitigate the side elevation from the north for the reduced elevation of the 70 to the 65%. This shows the 59% masonry that essentially shows that the architectural metal panels would come down below the first story to above the right at the second story to the first story area, and that's where the difference would be between the 59 and the 70%. From a discussion with Tim, and he'll be able to provide that to you, it would require an additional 960 square feet of masonry to be able to go between the 70% and the 59%, and it would be from discussion with Tim, he did say that it would be approximately $12 to some odd dollars per square foot for the 960 square feet, so you're talking about $11,500 to an extra $12,000 to be able to look at the front elevation. The resolution that you have in front of you this evening has some options. The first one would be essentially to meet the ordinance requirement for the 70% masonry along the front and allow the exceptions reducing the masonry on both sides from the 70 to 65, provided that the landscaping would be put on both sides of the north side and then keeping the landscaping that is proposed on the south, and then also to allow the reduced masonry on the rear from the 70 to 51% as discussed with the berm and the railroad tracks. Or you have another option, among others, to allow the requested exceptions to reduce the masonry to 59% on the front, 65 on the sides, 51 on the rear. But those were some conditions that you would see on the plan to essentially try to push the building back approximately 10 feet to allow a sufficient landscape edge along the highway edge along private property. The first plan that was shown looked at the idea for trying to put some landscaping in the state right away, but from discussing with the maintenance folks with the TxDOT, they would not allow that. And so that's what we were looking to try to have the building reduced on the front yard setback to allow the landscaping on the private property. And again, it would be the same landscaping along the frontage of both sides, and that's shown as in Exhibit D. And so I'd be glad to answer any questions that the council has as you work your way through this, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that the council may have. There's one more slide that I want to try to make sure that it was shown. And if you'll allow me. There's one slide that I cannot find that we had put in there. You'll have to excuse me, Mayor. Short of having this slide, and I apologize of what that one, if you would look at your cover sheet that you have as part of your agenda memo this evening, and looking at the bottom of the page for phase 1, there's certain criteria that the council must consider when you are looking at an exception to the ordinance, and that would be its visibility from the right-of-way or the percentage right-of-way requested. Thank you, Jonathan. This the yellow one. So it would be the visibility from your public right-of-way or adjoining properties, the percentage of the exception requested, and if there was any type of permanent screening of some type of landscaping, masonry walls, berms, or some other screening technique, and then the extent to which any building articulation, which could be cover anything from columns or canopies or some type of arches, and then lastly, whether the material furthers an architectural theme. And if you can remember when we reviewed this ordinance, that was something that possibly where a franchisee may come and for the architectural theme may be different than what the masonry is required. And so those are the 5 options that the council should consider when you review an exception to the ordinance.
Well, no, I really had a question concerning this, probably more toward the city attorney, but are those criteria and options binding on the council or the administrator?
If you slide that down, David, right below that it says that the council, can you slide that up? No, I'm sorry. Right below that, yeah, it says the criteria will consider those same criteria when considering whether to grant exceptions.
Okay. Thank you.
So you had suggested that they have landscaping to help mitigate the reduced amount of masonry, but yet all the landscaping is going to cover up the masonry. It's not going to do a thing for the metal, which is what we supposedly were wanting to address there. So if we're going to make it look prettier because of landscaping, and it's going to cover up the masonry, that we are getting out of the deal, and the additional metal is going to still be exposed regardless.
As the maturation of the vegetation would increase, that metal would be shielded or screened by the mature landscaping. That is a fact, but it would take time.
Let's assume you got a solid tree line that's going to be up in front of that. And is that what they're looking for? I mean, you know, and we're going to get a chance to visit about this, Tim. So, but I wanted to get from staff's perspective, you know, what are we trying to accomplish with landscaping?
I don't think it needs to be a trade. You either do this or this. It's what fits and what looks good. And does it fit? I mean, since you can't we'll take more trees, and it shouldn't be a trade or a negotiation. It's just what looks good where it's located.
What's the timeline on how all this thing went down, Tim? I mean, the first one that submitted was, well, it's not really, because I'm curious why a plan was done that didn't meet the ordinance, and I'm just wondering if it was done before the ordinance was enacted.
No, the ordinance was passed in mid-April as stated, and the plans were submitted in mid to end of October.
And why it's, I guess, to design to save $11,000, I can't fathom that.
Well, that's just, I'm explaining the amount of percentage that would be for the square footage, and there might be a question to ask Tim, because he was the one that provided the dollar amount, and all I did was multiply the two. Because there's still, I would think, construction application, I mean, all those things, but from the cost of being provided that.
Any other questions for staff? Comments from staff? Well, come tell us about your building.
Sir.
How are you?
Good, sir. Thank you. While Tanya's sitting, she's got some renderings here that she's going to set up. My name is Tim Chadwick. I'm the president of MW Builders of Texas. We're located in Temple at 1701 North General Bruce Drive. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to come forward tonight and discuss with you our plans for expanding our business. Just a brief minute about MW Builders of Texas. We're an employee-owned general construction contracting company. We work primarily in the military construction, K-12 education, student housing, and any other type of projects that really fit our resources. On a real positive note, in today's economical world, we've seen a lot of growth in our business in the last couple of years. And so, and maybe this helps Tony with his question, almost a year ago to today, I engaged Architectural Edge in designing a new facility that we hoped we could build at 1701 North General Bruce Drive. This particular piece of property, it's important to us. We're currently leasing from Mr. Mickey Goolsby this property. We've been there for a little over 20 years. We currently occupy 2 buildings on the property, and those 2 buildings combined, we max out office space at about 18 employees. And right now I've got a few more than 18 in there. But the new design that you see, the floor plan that we're proposing that we want to build, actually combines our estimating and our operations staffs under one roof, and will give us the capacity to employ up to 45 people in Temple. The action tonight on our variance request, it carries significant weight on a very important decision that I'm tasked with making on behalf of the company, as I've been in some very preliminary discussions with Mr. Goolsby about the possibility of MW Builders purchasing approximately 10 acres of his property that we currently reside on. And we'll see, well, actually it was on Tim's slide, you'll be able to see the area or the property that we're talking about. But I'm reluctant right now, obviously on the behalf of the employee owners of MW Builders, to enter that transaction until I'm comfortable that we'll be able to expand and continue to expand our business on this property in an economical fashion. We have had several discussions with staff with regards to their proposed alternatives, and we've explained to them in the past that we're not interested in building either one of those, or not interested in building that particular elevation, and weren't interested in the setback and the additional landscaping for the very purpose that the mayor brought up with regards to planting additional trees to try to hide the building, specifically hide the portion of the building that the ordinance covers. We did submit a building that was designed by a professional architect. We submitted a permit application. With that permit application, we submitted a variance request to the masonry ordinance. Our building, again, as I mentioned, it was designed by a professional. It looks very professional, and we believe it meets the intended spirit of the masonry ordinance. And we need one minor exception to that ordinance approved from council. Just a minute with the building. I think you've probably got pictures of it in front of you, but just to address a couple of comments that Tim made, the first floor of the building does consist of a stone wainscot, and in our world we call it EIFS. It's an exterior insulation finish system known as EIFS, as an accent on the first floor. The second level is entirely made up of a concealed fastener architectural metal panel. The $11,000 that Tim mentioned, and I apologize, maybe I misunderstood the question he asked me yesterday, but he asked what the difference between the metal panel in our elevation and the additional EFS in the city's elevation, what that area was, and I told him it was 960 square feet, and he asked, what does 960 square feet of EFS run? And I said, somewhere around $10-12 a square foot. There's really not a cost differential between metal panels and EFS, so it wouldn't be an additional $11,000. With our elevation, you've got to either have metal panels. With the city's proposed elevation, you've got EFS, and the two materials are truly a wash. But where they're not comparable is the EFS system. It's susceptible to fading in probably about 5 years. It's highly susceptible to water intrusion, and with water, you've got the exposure to potential mold issues. What we get with the metal panel is we get a Kynar 500 finish. That's important in our world, in the building world. A Kynar 500 finish comes with a 20-year warranty. It warrants the metal against rusting and fading. And so, we're coming before the council. We're making a nearly $2 million investment in our new facilities. It's going to be a showcase for our company, and it's a place that our employee owners are going to be proud of and want to come to work every day. And before I close and let you guys ask any questions that you may have, I want to talk just a little bit about the piece of property that we're planning on purchasing, and this is roughly 10 acres that goes all the way back to the railroad easement and encompasses our 2 existing buildings, and we will, with our plan, there'll be 1 existing building that we'll remove to make room for the new building. But I want to point out a section of the masonry ordinance that's concerning to me, and that I think that I would like to ask the city to address as well, and that's paragraph 7B of the ordinance. And this particular paragraph stipulates what a strategic corridor includes, and I'll read from the ordinance. It says, tracts of land that are developed, used, managed, or marketed as a group that includes a tract of land that abuts or adjoins a public street or highway designated as a strategic corridor. Obviously, the property we're talking about purchasing abuts North General Bruce Drive and I-35, but there's a significant portion of the property that will be behind a wooden fence that we certainly will want to obviously grow and expand into that property in the future. And pre-engineered metal buildings, we're a very small part of our business is we're a distributor to Seco Building Systems. They're the world's largest pre-engineered metal building manufacturer. And another not necessarily a determining factor, but an economical factor for us with the metal siding is we buy that metal siding at a lesser cost through our distributorship. And in the future, as we grow into this space, we're going to want to construct additional facilities. And a pre-engineered metal building is an economical way for us to be efficient in our operation. So that portion of the ordinance, I believe, needs to be addressed as well. That's all I've got. Tanya McKeska with Architectural Edge is with us tonight, and if you've got architectural questions, I'm sure she'd be glad to answer any of those. Or if you've got construction type questions, I'd be glad to answer any of those.
So to my question, I can't imagine Tanya would have missed that. So this was designed with an exception from day one. Y'all were going to request an exception.
When we started this process, like I said, about a year ago, and I don't know the exact dates, this was the very first elevation that Tanya brought.
So that was before the actual masonry.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. And so as you progressed after the masonry ordinance, you knew you were designing for an exception. You were going to request an exception.
Correct. But our exception, in our opinion, is a superior product.
I understand, and I want to be clear, at least from my point of view. We call it some people call it the metal building ordinance. My desire was never to eliminate metal. My desire was to eliminate corrugated and things like that for visual purposes. Decorative metal, or architectural metal panels. those are not, don't give me heartburn. That looks fine to me. Not that, I mean, we're not voting, but, and even on the back, when you got what you're doing in the back, I'm not as concerned with having to go to the expense that you're going on the back of the building, because of what you're doing back there and what's behind you. I think, and we knew these variance requests, these exceptions were going to come. That was a very important part of the process,
Absolutely.
making sure that they were in there, and we will. I fully expect we will be continued, and people will push, and will come. And not that y'all are doing that, but people will try and feel it out. What's the boundaries? But I understand what you're trying to do. And my question was, and you've explained it, was when and how it all came about. It's a good-looking building. I agree with the mayor. I would hate to cover it up, try and cover it up with a bunch and block your windows. And I don't have a window anymore since I work for the man, and I value windows. So I think that you want to take full advantage of those. So. That's my 2 cents.
Mayor, may I please thank you, Tony, for your comments, because that's exactly what I was going to say. This exception process is exactly what you established the zoning ordinance and the process for, and we feel like we have met the intent of the law. It's something that's important to Tim, that he showcases the building materials, and we use the materials architecturally, and didn't bring a big 60 by 120 foot pre-engineered metal building skins box. So that you made the point that I was going to make. We knew it was an exception. It was the product that my client wanted. We felt like it was superior in a maintenance situation for them. So we knew we were going through this process.
And I also know the goal wasn't just to test the
No, sir.
No, I know that. So, I think, good.
And I might add that while we are a pre-engineered metal building distributor, this is not a pre-engineered
That's right.
metal building. This is a conventionally framed facility. We looked at the possibility of pre-engineered, and it didn't give us what we wanted. This is a conventionally framed facility with comment to the rear elevation. That's going to be our employee entrance. So while it doesn't look quite as architecturally pleasing as the front facade, that's why we went to that expense on the back though as well.
Well, you had mentioned the pre-engineered building in the rear of the property in the future. You're not talking now, but maybe in the future. Mm-hmm. But you also mentioned that may be a determining factor whether you purchase this property or not. Are you asking the council at this time, is a conventional metal building behind a wooden fence in that same area going to be
Subject to the ordinance?
subject to the ordinance? That's what I thought you might be asking after that paragraph, or you want a little more information on that. And if so, I think we need to make a decision on that as well, if that's what we're talking about, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to discuss that as well.
And with all due respect, and I appreciate they're wanting an answer on that, I'd say we're not posted to make that decision tonight. We can certainly bring that back. I understand the question and issue.
So we can't talk about the rear of the property?
Well, you can talk about the rear of the property, but I don't think you can make a call on the material or exception for another location, in fairness to the public and everybody else.
Unless he brought, what would it tell you?
Well, I mean,
he's talking about buying 10 acres, and if he can't build what he wants to in the back, it may make a decision whether he's going to buy it or not.
Well, let's bring that forward at the first meeting in January that we have and ask that same question for that address.
Does that hurt your timing on the acquisition of the property? Is it that time sensitive that, because we don't have a meeting in the first week of January? Very rare that occurs. So we're looking at the 15th of January before our next meeting, in which we would bring it back, because we've got to post it on the agenda.
Sure. I'm not sure my answer.
Mayor, if I may interject, please, from the planning department, if I may. I had discussed this same issue with Tim, and Mr. Graham reiterated that when I discussed it with him, I said it's not on this evening's agenda. There are pertinent questions which we'd be happy to, as I told him, to be able to discuss it after the decision was made this evening, to be able to take a look at what would happen on the what I would call the eastern end of the property. And so it may not necessarily require council's attention at your mid-January meeting.
I might add, I mean, I don't see any harm in the council expressing their feelings on the subject matter, but I don't think it's appropriate to try to take a vote on the adjacent property.
Well, American, if I can,
But it's all one property. I mean, we're talking about one parcel.
Well,
and what makes it different?
I'm just reading the agenda item. It says for the future building at 1701 North Jim Spruce Drive.
Mayor, can I just ask a question for Jonathan? In terms of I think there are two different questions here or issues. One of them, I'm going to pose to Jonathan, but is it proper to ask if the ordinance has application to the rear of the property? Is it currently considered in this ordinance? Not and just a question in terms of whether the ordinance applies to that, given what we know about that. The second question, which I tend to agree with Jonathan, is asking for a decision or vote on that item tonight is not before council and not something you probably could consider, I don't think. But in terms of the applicability of the current ordinance to the rear of the property, that would seem to be a question that could be answered before, after, during the meeting, I would think. And that's in the frame of the question.
Yeah. And I don't have, if we have maybe I don't even understand the question, but if we have something showing both the parcel, this 10 acres that I think is on your drawing, and something showing the adjacent one and maybe the corridor, maybe.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Go ahead. Jonathan, the ordinance reads right now that any piece of property that fronts the corridor, strategic corridor, is subject to the ordinance. It doesn't discern depth. It's any complex of buildings that's on the same property. So as we understand the ordinance right now, any building as far back as the railroad tracks would be subject to the ordinance unless we got an exception.
If we didn't purchase this entire 10 acres, say we purchased 5, whoever owned this back here,
would not.
That portion of this parcel wouldn't be subject to the ordinance because their property does not abut the strategic corridor.
How does that go into the ordinance when it excludes existing buildings?
No, this is not.
No, well, but it's direct, the existing, but when we excluded existing, they have to add directly onto the building, correct, Tim? To the building in question, correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
It's not a new, that would not be considered existing that'd be new construction.
New construction. But your same masonry ordinance allows mechanisms for screening and being behind other buildings that are screened from public view. And again, you still have the multiple track railroad tracks to the east of it with the berm, so that's a non-issue. And if you have it behind another this proposed office building, those are some other mitigating factors to understand.
And they have a very unique location as well with the viaduct, I mean, with where they're situated on 35.
Yeah. You're right.
I mean, it's kind of partially screened.
You don't see it till you're on
Anyway,
I think Kim was just visiting with me about a portion of the ordinance. I don't feel like I have enough information to help the staff interpret that part. There is some information, and I remember when we were discussing this, because I think in one of the drafts, we were talking about a certain depth from that corner or the depth of the property, and we kind of went to the current system. There is some language in there that talks about that you could have a metal building on the rear of the lot if it isn't visible from the street and all that, but I'm not sure that right now that we could make that interpretation other than say we'll be glad to meet with you on that and then tell you that I think there is some flexibility in the ordinance for that. When you've got a building out front that meets the criteria, depending on what the council would do with an exception, if the building behind it isn't visible from the street. But I don't know that we can tell from this whether you're committing to the size of the accessory building at this point in time.
I don't think anybody would want an airport hangar back there, but I don't think that's why I think it's an exception deal, as well as people are committed. I mean, as a council person, you've done what we hoped would happen you got a very nice looking building, and there's a desire to work with businesses to do win-win and do things. So I can't imagine there would not be a scenario that would be mutually beneficial. Your location is very unique, and then you are screened from the 35 itself on a lot of that back area. So, I mean, is that acceptable for y'all to get? I mean, your timeline is the issue. We can't do anything. There's nothing we can do council-wise.
And I understand that, and I understand that portion of it wasn't on the agenda, and if we need to come back to the first part of January to discuss that, or if that's something that Mr. Graham needs to look into. I mean, it's not the most critical thing that I've got to get done moving forward with our transaction. This building is our first priority. So.
Do you know for a fact that TxDOT's going to hold that east right-of-way on I-35 there? The expansion of I-35 is all going to the west at that section? So
we know we have a permit.
I'm
we
sorry.
know we have a curb cut.
We do have a curb cut permit from TxDOT.
Okay, but the most important thing is when the I-35 is expanded and the frontage roads are expanded, are they holding your right-of-way there and everything's going to go to the west?
The latest information from TxDOT is everything in Phase 3 is going west.
Yeah, okay.
Subject to change.
Good. Okay.
Everything that we know today, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've done the same thing with something I was looking at. I lost 3 acres on my side, which caused us to have to look elsewhere. So,
very nice building.
Thank you.
The question I have, and it might be difficult to address at this point, is it says right now, it's likely before, at some point in time, to be in an overlay district.
Yes, sir.
Would you expect in an overlay district that the bar will be raised even higher relative to aesthetics?
In certain sections of the corridor,
uses?
In certain sections of the corridor, I could see different uses being applied. Some that would be raising the bar higher, and some that would be keeping the bar at its height. The umbrella group that, just for the council's information, that consists of the Reinvestment Zone Committee, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the TEDC, are looking at a set of I-35 overlay guidelines, and there would be certain sections of that corridor that would contain different standards. As far as the area up north, it was looking at it to be more of an industrial type of a use, and I can't tell you tonight what those criteria would consist of.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I'm just hypothetically, you've been involved in the discussion. I've never heard a single discussion on overlay that I've personally been involved in. So I'm trying to get a sense, because I know what we're trying to accomplish with SIS, and I know what we're trying to accomplish with I-35 in the future, as far as the appearance and the impression of this community as people travel up and down Interstate 35. And I've got an affinity to industrial buildings. I kind of like industrial buildings myself, and I think, you know, it also is, you know, the kind of investment we hope people will make in our community. And I'm sure not personally hunkered up over 5% or 8%, or, you know, I mean, there was obviously an effort made to get there, and appears to be an attractive building from what we can see there. Good materials, long life. You take it into consideration all the things that would, you know, from your comments, that would make that appear good for as long as you reasonably can expect it to.
Right.
Okay.
So we need
other comments or questions?
We need to then. I'm sorry.
For Mr. Chadwick. Or?
Well, from staff's perspective, it's essentially the front or the west elevation, because we were allowing administrative exceptions to the two sides to be reduced to the 65%, and the rear, back into the railroad tracks, to be the 51%. So any motion you have in front of you this evening, if you concur with the administrative allowance for the exceptions for the sides and the rear, you're looking at the western side or at the front elevation.
So everybody's in agreement on the two sides.
Staff is okay with the rear and two sides, just
the only thing that we would ask for the council to consider would be additional landscaping on its northern side, as was shown as Exhibit C in your packet this evening for the landscaping. That's the only difference.
So if we wanted to concur with Mr. Chadwick here, we would we would give him the exemption for the front of the building. And
you need to consider the landscaping on the north
and
side.
not have him up the landscaping to just make it to minimum standards or whatever.
What he had
Existing
what was
ordinance-
submitted meets the minimum standards.
Yeah, meets the minimum standards. Is that what you're after?
Yeah, I mean, our original, these trees are not existing. They were part of our original plan. What staff was talking about is on this north elevation, wanting us to plant trees along the north side here. Quite frankly, when you come southbound, you don't see this particular property until you're right up adjacent to it. So those trees aren't going to screen much.
Russell, what Tim is saying though, our proposal does meet minimum requirements.
Okay. From a landscaping standpoint.
And all we looked at for the mitigation of the reduced masonry would be looking at what you have on your slide to your left.
For purposes of action, I would suggest that if you can put that slide back up, that if you're going to grant an exception to the percentages that he is currently proposing.
Well, it's really just that one.
It's the one that he recalculated, basically. I think we've got that. Is that the one that's recalculated?
Yes, that's the one that's recalculated.
I'd make a motion that we grant an exception with the 51% as presented.
It's revised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The
window,
far right
that's
column.
Counting 59% and that they would meet minimum landscaping requirements.
Second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter?
Aye.
Councilmember Jansack?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Luna?
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider?
Aye.
Mayor Jones?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
To council, I hope that, I know this was precedent setting, you were looking for some guidance, and I would think this is on the cusp that I would hope that something like this would be brought back if there was another one that came like this. 'Cause I think this is close enough, it would be brought back to us again.
I agree with Tony. I think the intent of the masonry ordinance was not to alleviate metal sidings or anything else. It was the corrugated box look like we talked about. I would also make sure that the incoming clients would know that option from a staff, and not just say no, it's got to be 70% period, and not have to find it out maybe through another organization or something like that. The staff would, make them aware of the appeals process. I think those do that.
Which we have.
Mayor, Claire, you said that I would hope that as these precedent decisions get made, that staff is empowered to not necessarily have to
over time, I would agree.
Not bring these back.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
But if this one were to occur again at this level.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand.
You'd have to actually change the ordinance. I think
Because the bar isn't 65%, it's
Oh, I
not
understand.
59%.
No,
it's
I'm not
70%.
saying by percent wise, but where it's, okay.
So-
I'm with you.
Mayor, I was if we're expressing hopes and desires, one of my hopes and desires is that as time, this may be what you were alluding to there just a moment ago, but as time goes by, that the baseline and the bar that is set for the design of these facilities and buildings will start with the ordinance requirements. Now, I realize this one, the design process started prior to the adoption of the ordinance, but the ordinance was adopted, the design process continued, and again, that baseline or that bar was set, and again, not anything disparaging at all against the facility or the building, but that over time, that where we would begin the discussion at, and where the design criteria would begin, is with what the ordinance requires. And from a staff standpoint, that's going to be our intent, is to continue to administer the ordinance and the percentages that the ordinance calls for. And I would hope that the design firms and the architectural firms begin with that process just as staff does.
Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. Next item is item 8, consider adopting a resolution designating the chair of the Tax Increment Financing Reinvestment Zone Number 1 Board of Directors for 2009. Each year, as we make appointments, this is the one board where the council appoints the chair of the reinvestment zone. And Harry Cloud has served successive years as the chair of the reinvestment zone. His term ends in 2009, in the fall of 2009. And I believe that's the point where the offices in TEDC change as well, isn't it, after those appointments? Okay. And Mr. Cloud is currently serving as the treasurer of TEDC.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Okay. So, and the reason that he is on the TEDC Board of Directors is as a result of him being chair of the reinvestment zone. So,
Well,
saying
treasurer is incoming president, correct?
No.
I mean, is that, no, there's one other, like, usually that's, okay. So
it doesn't necessarily progress.
Okay.
Okay,
So you're
on
not going to have a
TEDC.
scenario,
Yeah,
are you
correct.
proposing reappoint, I mean, are you?
I would suggest we allow him to continue
Finish
to
out.
serve, but then his seat ends in '09 as a reinvestment zone board member, and he's not eligible for reappointment. I believe that's correct. Is that correct? So he cannot continue to serve there. That would end his term on the TEDC board at that time as well. But that's when we change officers at TEDC, is at that point in
So
time.
his
So he wouldn't-
treasurership, so not overlapping presidents? No.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so we wouldn't have a situation where, and we kind of, talked about with Clydette on this one, where his reinvestment zone position ends, but yet he still needs to be treasurer through the end of the year. That's not the case. They change offices when those appointments are made, so.
Why would you designate it right now when his term ends up for 7 months from now?
Why would what?
Why are we designating the chair now when his...
That's just by ordinance. That's the time of the year we do it. Yeah.
Statute.
It's the one board where we appoint the chair, and we do that in conjunction with the calendar year.
Okay.
I motion we reappoint Harry Cloud
Second.
For this term.
Have a motion and a second, further discussion? There being none, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter.
Aye.
Councilmember Jansen.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Luna.
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider.
Aye.
Mayor Jones.
Aye. Item 9 is consider adopting a resolution nominating one person to serve as a community director on the Ida Olafie Foundation for Animal Care. And we have an opportunity to appoint to this foundation, which works in conjunction with our animal services facility. Ms. Luann Anderson has served on that board and is interested in continuing to serve, and that board members would like her to serve, so if there's no objection to that, I'll entertain a motion for Ms. Luann Anderson to continue to serve on that board, on that foundation board.
Motion to appoint Lou Ann Anderson to serve as the community director on the Ida Olafie Foundation for Animal Care.
We have a motion and a second by Councilmember Janzak. Further discussion? There being none, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter.
Aye.
Councilmember Jansen.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Luna.
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider.
Aye.
Mayor Jones.
Aye. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our meeting this evening. A reminder that we will not have a council meeting the first Thursday in January, as that is New Year's Day, and so that meeting is canceled, and our next meeting will be on January the 15th. Merry Christmas to each and every one of you, and we are adjourned.